So our second reading is from David Della. One of the largest chapters and most significant chapters in the book is about the struggle for justice in the murders of Silme, Domingo, and Jean Viernes, who were killed at the orders of the Marcos regime. That struggle, which continues today, but we were able to win a multi-million-dollar verdict in the case, a landmark case, the first time a foreign dictator has ever been held responsible for murders of U.S. citizens. David also has two stories in the book. One in the beginnings, along with Romy's, called A Little Red Book. You know what Little Red Book that is, right? Mao Zedong book. We don't read that anymore. And David's going to read a story in the section about the Committee for Justice for Domingo and Viernes and the struggle for justice in the murders. And it's called A Day I'll Live With for the Rest of My Life.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyway, welcome everyone here. And so, as Cindy mentioned, I was one of the founding members, along with Cindy and others, of the Seattle chapter of the KDP. What brought me here was the Asian identity movement, working on different issues in our schools and our community with regards to discrimination issues and preserving this community here in the International District. So when Dale Borgeson came around to recruit people, he started having parties because we all like to party. And so he invited us to a party, a drinking party at his house. And we went there and said, what's all this about? And we started talking about the Philippines, right? And so I was on my way up to Alaska in 1974. And as I was getting onto the bus to go to the airport to go to Alaska to work in the canneries, Angel Domingo handed me this little red book, Philippine Society and Revolution. And he said, brother, read this when you're up there and tell me what you think, right? So I have the story in the first story about what that was. Anyway, the result of that was for me to join the chapter when I returned from Alaska. And in the KDP, I worked on student organizing, community organizing, and eventually got into the labor team in helping to reform Local 37 ILWU, the Cannery Workers Union. And so the murders of Silme, Domingo, and Jean Viernes on June 1, 1981 was both a defining and a tragic moment for our movement and the KDP and the anti-Marcos movement. And it was such because that incident alone defined really what we were about. And that incident alone provided the gravity and the seriousness of the work that we were doing. And really, it was really about providing the intersection between the brutalities of the Marcos dictatorship and what was going on here in America, especially with regards to workers' rights. And if you read in the books and the other stories, there was a resolution that came out of ILWU that looked for setting up a investigating team to link up the struggles of what was going on in the Philippines in their unions there that was being cracked down by the Marcos dictatorship and the U.S. labor movement. And that became very dangerous to the Marcos dictatorship. So as Cindy mentioned, their murders was not a routine union reform murder. The way it was done was a message to the movement that you're getting too close. You're getting too close to the source. And so we had a decision to make right away. Was whether we're going to cower from that type of incident or we're going to move forward. We chose to move forward. So in a lot of ways, what the story I want to read is the day of the murders, because I was late for a meeting on that day. If I was on time, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you to talk. But it really defined not only our movement, but personally it defined who I am and what type of work I was going to be dedicated to do for the rest of my life. So I'll read the excerpt from my, here it is. I was working at another job downtown on my way down to the Union Hall to meet with Silme and Jean. I worked right up to 4:35 p.m. before I realized that I was going to be late for the meeting that I have to listen to Silme ribbon me all night for being late on vacillating on taking up the task needed to coordinate the Philippine National Day this year. I worked downtown less than a mile from the Union Hall. I could have walked, but had my car that day. I was driving south on 2nd Avenue when I saw a fire truck suddenly pull up in front of the Union Hall on South Main Street, and an ambulance leaving with the siren blaring and lights flashing. Oh my God, was the Union Hall on fire? As I drove past the intersection on 2nd and Main, I could see to my left was Silme's Monte Carlo parked in its usual parking space. I cautiously proceeded around the corner and parked just behind the Union Hall and got out and walked towards the building. A fire truck and police cruiser were parked outside, and I saw a firefighter in full gear walking out of the door. I ran up and asked if there was a fire. He said there was no fire, but a shooting had occurred, and one man was dead inside, and another one had been taken to Harborview Hospital. He showed me the small pool of blood on the sidewalk in front of the door. He showed me the small, as if to prove that there had in fact been a shooting. I asked about Silme. He said he didn't know who Silme was, but there was a dead man inside the union offices. I told him I was on the executive board of the union and that I wanted to go inside. The firefighter asked if I could help identify the dead man. Hesitantly, I said I would try and asked again about Silme. Again, he told me he didn't know who Silme was. The firefighter went in and brought out a policeman to escort me in and identify whoever was dead. As I walked behind the police officer, I was shaking. Inside, I saw another union member, Matt Callowing. He told me it was Gene who was dead on the floor. I walked into the office area and saw the most hideous sight I've ever seen. Gene was lying on the floor with blood splattered up from his torso over his face. His eyes were still open with an empty, dead look. Oh God, I thought I was going to throw up. I turned and bolted out of the hall, wanted to get outside, hoping that none of this was really happening. My adrenaline took over. I asked the police officer who had followed me out where Silme was. He interrupted, asking if I could positively identify the dead man. I said, yes, he is my friend and roommate. I told the cop that I was supposed to come here and meet with Silme and Gene. He told me that the other man was pretty badly shot and was being taken to Harborview Hospital. I asked for a ride to the hospital. He said I could go out, get one as soon as they finished up a few things. I ran across the street to Swanee's, which was a bar right across the street from the Union Hall, a sports bar, and got to a telephone to call someone. I had to tell someone that something awful had just happened. I was numb. I couldn't cry, scream, nothing. I called Lenny Marin's house. Lenny had been transferred to the KDP from New York's chapter to help us with our work here. Lenny answered the phone, and I just gushed out the words that there had been a shooting at the Union Hall, and Gene was dead, and Silme was at the hospital. Lenny started crying loudly while simultaneously trying to tell her partner, Mila de Guzman, what had happened. Before long, I heard them both crying. I was still too numb to cry. Lenny told me to go to the hospital to check on Silme and that she would call Bruce Oxenia and others in San Francisco. So what followed that was I went to the hospital to check on Silme. He had been through a couple of surgeries but was still alive, and he passed away 24 hours later. But this is just to say that we had the resolve to go in the next day to continue to work with Silme and Gene, despite what had happened. And it really was a work that the KDP did for many years that strengthened our resolve, but also strengthened the movement to not only find out what was truly behind the murders, but also to build the movement for justice for the murders.